Hello and welcome to episode number 79 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Wow, Gar, 79 episodes. I can't believe it, but the shows just keep getting better and better. And today, Gar, we're going to do an episode on one of my all-time favorite classic movies from 1968. And I'm, of course, talking about the classic movie Neil Simon's Odd Couple, starring, of course, those two legendary actors, maybe now rest in peace, Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau. I mean, you and I were just talking about the fact that we both watched the movie last night to help prepare for the show. So let's get into it, Gar. I mean, first of all, what are your memories of this movie the first time you ever saw it?
Well, the 1950s and the 1960s, both of those decades were very similar as far as aesthetic style and social behavior and all of that kind of stuff. Things that were important to people, kind of remained the same during those two decades. And so that movie really kind of is a time machine, kind of taking you back, to that time period where it was a crossing over from black and white to color.
Sure.
I think the reason why this movie really kind of captured audiences at that time was because of the shocking juxtapositions of the two characters, because they were so radically different. And to be honest with you, I kind of look at it, from a different viewpoint nowadays because I'm a little bit older,
sure,
and a little bit wiser. But one of the characters kind of had gay qualities.
Sure,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other character was testosterone
driven,
through and through.
Yeah.
And that mixture of those two type of characters bouncing off of each other and in such a kind of a verbally shocking way was that super sauce for the movie.
Yeah. And of course the movie starts off, Gar, in Oscar Madison's apartment. And Oscar Madison, of course, is the character played by Walter Matthau. And him and his buddies, they get together regularly for a game of poker, once a week or whatever. And this was their weekly poker game. And at the start of the film, too, they're talking about their friend Felix, who hasn't really kind of entered the picture yet. And they're talking about something awful's happened to him, and nobody's heard from him, and they're just so worried about him. And then, so there's all this buildup about Felix until, he even comes into the picture.
Yeah, all of the characters were such testosterone characters, with the exception of
Felix.
Jack Lemmon. Yeah, Felix. Yeah. And so, all of these guys were, really, guys.
Yeah.
And during that time, what is it that guys like to do? They like to smoke cigars back in the 50s and the 60s. They like to drink back in the 50s and the 60s, and they like to gamble. They like to play poker back in those days. And why do guys like to play poker? Because guys can sit around a table drinking and smoking cigars and talking about guy stuff where they're not being filtered by having to watch what they say because of the women being around. Because there was a definite thing about guys that guys could not be like testosterone guys, around women.
Yeah.
And so when guys get together at poker games, now it's like they can let their hair down and just be themselves and talk about things that guys like to talk about, and poke at each other like guys like to do.
Yeah, just rib one another. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So the poker game really kind of represented all of that, the guy's guy thing.
Yeah, and once Felix enters the picture, the dynamics between him and Oscar, it sets up the comedy for the rest of the movie. I mean, the fact that they are two such polar opposites, but even as a movie is starting, it starts with Jack Lemmon on the screen. He's walking in a New York street, and he ends up at I guess what was a local strip club, and he's all in his business suit and everything, and he's got an angry look on his face as he's entering the strip club. I don't even know that he meant to go there. He maybe thought he was going to a restaurant. Oh, what the hell is this? And he had that kind of look on his face, and he really looked out of place. But and that's another thing I noticed at the top of a movie. But you're right away kind of thinking, what is it with this? What's up with this guy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
During that time, that separation between those two male types were really, I mean, there was a real dividing line between that.
Yeah.
And I remember, when I was in my 20s back in the 70s, my late teens and early 20s back in the 1970s, I remember I was one of those guys that I kind of had both sides of the coin.
Sure.
I had the guy's guy aspect to me, but I was also secure enough with myself, that I didn't mind doing things around the house that were back in those days were considered that's only for women to do, like washing the dishes. Back in the 1970s, there was a real dividing line about that. There was a large swath of the male part of society that refused to do any of those type of things, like cooking, like cleaning in the kitchen, like vacuuming, doing any of those type of things. That was taboo back in the 70s, and people have kind of lost that, but that was real because I lived it.
Yeah, me too, Gar. I mean, that was definitely a stereotype. There were guys that used to try to make me feel, because I had no problem, taking care of that end because I didn't feel comfortable with making women do everything. Yeah.
Like waiting on me hand and foot. That just did not make me feel comfortable. So I learned how to do a lot of these things. I was also, at a young age, a single parent that when my children came and visited me, I had to cook for the kids.
Of course, yeah.
When they came and visited. So I had to become good at those kind of things. So, but what I'm talking about is that movie. It really, really drives home the differences between those two aspects of male society.
Yeah, it definitely filled with those stereotypes throughout the movie. And, it's funny you make that point, Gar, because another thing I noticed at the beginning of the movie is we're in Oscar Madison's apartment at the poker game and all this. He gets a phone call, and it's from his ex-wife, and she puts on... apparently his son, but and for Oscar Madison being such a cool, man's man type of guy, but the way he was talking, you would have thought he was talking to like his daughter because he was referring to the kid as honey and sweetie pie. Not that that's anything wrong with that, but you wouldn't expect a man, especially back in 1968, to talk that way to his son. How you doing, honey? How you doing, sweetie pie? And so again, as I'm watching this movie, that's just one more of those stereotypes that I was reminded of.
Well, really that you just hit on an appropriate thing because there is a dividing line on that.
Yeah.
when a child during that time period, when the child was really, really young,
yeah,
like elementary age, early elementary age, you would talk to the kid like that, whether it was a boy or a girl.
Yeah.
But once the child reaches a certain age, then it became inappropriate to talk to your boy that way.
Yeah. It's funny how times have changed, but again, that's why we do this, and we have fun watching these old classic movies. And of course, just to give people a time frame, once again, what we're talking about, The Odd Couple is a 1968 American comedy film starring Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. The film was based on writer Neil Simon's 1965 play. The movie was released on May 2nd, 1968. The film's running time was 105 minutes, but I bring up the fact that this was based on Neil Simon's play from 1965, because so often, as is the case, Gar, when you go see a movie, it is typically based on either a book or a play of some type. And interestingly enough, I found out that Walter Matthau also played the role of Oscar Madison in Neil Simon's play when it was on Broadway in 1965, and the one that played Felix in the play version was none other than actor Art Carney.
Yeah, and everybody that knows Art Carney, his fame was
The Honeymooners.
Norton. Norton on Honeymooners. He played Norton so good.
Sure. I mean, that was his.
But I just have a hard time picturing him as Felix.
Yeah. And it's interesting that tells you why that when they did the play version in 1965 on Broadway, that Walter Matthau obviously he nailed that part so much that when it came time to do the movie, he ultimately got it. But interestingly enough, I also learned when they started talking about making a movie version of this. Walter Matthau, like we said, ended up getting the part, but the producers initially considered some other people for that part. I mean, I was reading that they also considered Frank Sinatra and Jackie Gleason for the part, but ultimately Walter Matthau won out because he had the experience.
Yeah, and when they were trying to put the movie together, before when it was all in its assembling stage, they wanted Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, and Oscar Wilde, as the writer. And unfortunately, the deal that they wanted didn't work for the studio because they wanted like $3 million and 50% of the profits.
Wow!
And that's $1 million per guy. That's $1 million to Jack Lemmon, $1 million to Walter Matthau, and $1 million to Wilde. And it just wasn't, the numbers, weren't working. So the studio head took over negotiations. And this is a very telling thing because, Wilde dropped out. And then they signed Jack Lemmon to $1 million to play that part. Yeah, and Walter Matthau got $300,000 to do his part.
And what's funny about all that, Gar?
So what does that tell you about the status of the actors at that time?
Oh, sure.
That Jack Lemmon got that much more than Walter Matthau.
And not to mention that they were considering also Frank Sinatra for a part, which I have no doubt he could have done, but. You would think any movie being made, if you had a chance to have Frank Sinatra in your movie, that you would go with a guy like that because he was very popular at the time, not only in music but also in the movies. But obviously, maybe his asking price was way too much too, and so they said, "Well, we're going to go with the lesser known people at the time." And Jack Lemmon. Another thing I don't know, probably noticed, Gar, in this movie was these guys were both so young at the time. Anytime I've ever seen Jack Lemmon in a movie throughout my life, he's been an older man. He had white hair, but he doesn't have white hair in here. So we're getting to see a very young Jack Lemmon.
Well, yeah, and another thing that dawned on me, that I realized about, when I was looking into this, was this was considered a buddy movie.
Sure, sure.
And of course, buddy movies were, the earliest that I can remember of buddy movies was Bob Hope and Bing Crosby.
Yeah,
I'm sure there's others
yeah.
too, but buddy movies are kind of a unique thing and are not done as much nowadays as they used to be.
Yeah.
But back in that time, buddy movies, really kind of solidified, stardom for certain actors and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Being the Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin.
Oh, sure.
And all of that kind of stuff. Buddy movies are kind of not done as much nowadays.
And it's a real shame because there's some of the most classic, funniest movies ever. And we did a great episode a couple years back for our Thanksgiving episode on one of our favorite movies of all time, which is a great buddy movie. Of course, I'm talking about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, starring Steve Martin and the late great John Candy. That's another one people should really check out if you like buddy movies.
Oh my gosh! I think that the formula that works is when they end in a heartwarming scenario.
Yeah.
Just like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Yeah.
The way it ended was so special.
Yeah, it tugs at your heartstrings. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a component. That wasn't in this particular movie, but I think it's a component that really, a lot of buddy movies have to have that component.
And just to nail what you're what you're saying, Gar, about this being the ultimate buddy movie, I think is a fact. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I learned that these guys had such great chemistry on this film that they would go on to produce 10 more films together.
Well, yeah, I think they did like 12.
Okay.
This was their second pairing in a movie.
Yeah.
But they wound up doing a total of 12 Walter Matthau, Jack Lemmon pairings in movies.
Oh, okay.
They even did a remake of The Odd Couple, The Odd Couple 2. But
let's talk about that, Gar, for a minute, because in fact, I was talking a little bit about that when I posted on our Facebook page this morning. We were going to be doing this episode on The Odd Couple, and I talked about the fact that The Odd Couple 2 obviously is a sequel, but it comes 30 years later after the fact, and by the time The Odd Couple 2 comes out, it was pretty funny too. But I it's not the original, first of all, like you like to say, and the other thing I think is by the time Odd Couple 2 comes out, they had already done both of the Grumpy Old Men movies they did together, which is kind of a modern take on The Odd Couple. And so people that were around when Odd Couple 2 came out, the younger generation then, is kind of looking at it, what's The Odd Couple 2? This looks like it's Grumpy Old Man Part 3. Why are they calling it Odd Couple 2? And so people at that time probably weren't even aware of The Odd Couple, and what it was.
Yeah, but... I think it made less than half.
Yeah.
Of what the original, was able to do. So that's really, unfortunately, that was kind of a wah.
Yeah.
Pat on the back, and it was a nice job, Sonny.
Wow.
Yeah.
and I was, It said too that The Odd Couple was a hit at the box office, Gar. It was a film loved by both moviegoers and critics. The Odd Couple was the number 3 most popular movie of 1968, right behind Funny Girl, which was number 1 movie, and 2001 Space Odyssey, which was the number 2 movie.
Well, it was a surprise hit, I would imagine. You know what I mean? Because a movie like that, I don't think anybody had really done a script like that before. in a movie. So I don't. I think that there was a lot of white knuckling when it came out. Was it going to be successful? Was it it going to not work? You know what I mean? But now history shows that it was such a strong vehicle that not only did it do huge success, especially the numbers that it produced for that time, because those were phenomenal numbers for back in those days. I mean, you compare it to what movies do nowadays.
Not
nothing.
even. Yeah.
But during that time, those were outrageously good numbers.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Oh, sure. And of course, Gar, when I say The Odd Couple, depending on your age, you may think we're talking about this particular movie, or you may think we're talking about a classic 1970s TV show. And of course, it said The Odd Couple movie was so popular that in 1970, the TV network ABC was driven to create a TV series based on the popular movie that remained on the air from 1970 to 1975. The TV series starred, of course, Tony Randall and Jack Klugman. Now let me ask you, Gar, comparing the movie to the classic TV show, were you a fan of the TV show as well?
I didn't watch it. By that time, at that age, my focus, I think, was really on music.
Sure.
At that time, so. I don't think that my focus was in that area.
Oh, sure. And now here's the thing: if you compare the movie to the TV show, obviously they're different actors. But I must say, the guys on the TV show, I've watched some old reruns, and they got it down pretty good. Now, the biggest difference with the movie is the movie starts off with Walter Matthau playing with his other buddies, and Oscar Madison's playing poker in his apartment with his other buddies. They're talking about this crazy guy Felix before he even appears, with them, before he even shows up. And so we get an idea of who Felix is. But the point is, so in the movie, Felix eventually shows up and he starts telling everybody his awful news. His wife has just thrown him out and left him, and he's going through these crazy emotions of dealing with his divorce, whereas Oscar Madison's been divorced for years. So he shows up at his buddy's apartment. He has nowhere to go. Oscar invites Felix to move in with him. This is at the beginning. I mean, by the end of the movie, Felix is moving on. But when you have a TV series, you get the impression that they live together a lot longer, and these are all the different things they experienced while living together. So that's kind of two core differences between the movie and the TV series.
Well, I'm really kind of glad you brought up that the aspect of Jack Lemmon moving in with Walter Matthau, and that aspect because when I watched the movie last night, it raised a question in my mind, about apartments, I've lived in California all my life, and a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment is considered
luxurious,
family apartment. That's big because it's the size it's an apartment that's the size to accommodate a family. And family's needs. And so when I'm watching this movie, and this is, this dates back to, the 60s. And in the 1960s, there really were 8 bedroom apartments.
Wow. Yeah, I picked up on that too.
That is mind-boggling. I don't think that those 8 bedroom apartments exist anymore. I'm sure they divided those into instead of 1 apartment into 2 apartments or things like that. But that is really kind of a shocker when you see those really shocking differences between back then and now, because obviously a 8-bedroom apartment
is huge,
considered normal for that time period.
Yeah, I picked up on that.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I picked up on that too right away. I'm like, wow, 8-bedroom apartment. That's a huge apartment. That's what's going on in my mind, and yet it was still not big enough for Felix not to drive Oscar completely out of his mind. And, again, let's talk a little bit about the beginning of the movie, Gar. When Felix appears, they're also terrified that he's going to do something crazy to kill himself because, he's upset about his wife has thrown him out and is pending divorce. And so he's talking crazy and suicidal. And that's another thing that in 1968, I don't think they talked too much about, suicide. So it was kind of interesting that was thrown into the picture,
Well, yeah, back in the 60s, the actual word suicide was kind of a taboo word to even be said on TV or in movies. And a lot of people have kind of lost sight of that this is not a cuss word.
No.
This is not foul language, but yet it is. I mean, I don't recall them ever actually saying the word suicide in the movie.
In fact, they said he was going to kill himself. Yeah, do something crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In fact,
it just brings up another one of those things that shows the differences of back then versus today.
In fact, the build up to Felix, and then once he comes on the screen, I mean, he is the polar opposite of all those other guys, and yet there's something about him that those other guys care about. I mean, deeply. Like, they're so worried he's going to do something crazy. Oh my! Like, even when he enters the apartment for the first time, Oscar tells the other guys, "Okay, don't talk about his wife or his divorce or anything. Don't say anything that's going to set him off." And the whole time they're on their tippy toes, even to the point where he goes in the bathroom and he locks himself in the bathroom, and they're so concerned that he's in there by himself. And then he tells them that he takes a bottle of pills, and they just become so overly concerned.
I mean, overly is an understatement.
Yeah.
I mean, they just went over the top, with that concern, to making a mountain out of a molehill.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they weren't questioning what he took; they were just questioning the amount that he took. And the amount pointed towards an attempt at suicide.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, Gar, but one of the most funniest scenes in the whole movie to me was the scene where Oscar is having his mental breakdown, and he's telling, at this point, he stopped talking to Felix. They're in two completely other rooms, and Jack, Felix is just going so crazy. Okay. We need to work this out. Why are you not talking to me? And it's just, Oscar Madison's at that moment where this is not the time to work anything out. Just please be quiet. And then he's telling something about the spaghetti he's eating. Oh, Oscar, it's not spaghetti. It's linguine. And he just loses it there, takes the spaghetti, and he throws it against the wall. And he's like, I'm not going to clean that up, Oscar. You're going to clean it up. And then at some point he realizes Oscar's not going to clean up. So he's like, well, I guess I'll have to. And they get in this fight like, you better not touch that spaghetti. That spaghetti's staying on the wall.
That is the most famous scene
in the
movie.
Yeah.
That when after the movie was released and people were watching it in the theaters, that was the what do we call the Sparklets machine conversation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That became, because that's a 60s thing.
Yeah.
When people saw a movie and they would get up from their desk at work to go get something to drink at the Sparklets, you would stop and you would talk about, the movie or whatever that you saw. And that was a classic Sparklets machine conversation.
Wow.
During that time period, because that is how shocking that scene was, and people went away from that, and they would talk about that. Now, the crazy thing about that is, to me, I don't really think much of a difference between spaghetti and linguine.
Yeah, exactly. That was his point.
But that was the point in the whole thing, was that that sparked the plate being thrown in the first place.
Yeah.
Was that that.
He's like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And but then again, when you look at it nowadays, that was viewed as a funny scene.
Yeah.
But nowadays, that scene,
violence,
is seen as an abusive scene nowadays.
Yeah.
So the public actually mentally digests a scene like that very differently nowadays than they did way back in the late 60s when the movie came out.
And yet still we're talking about it today. It resonated with us when we were watching the movie all these years later last night. And another great moment in the picture that kind of shows you the two polar opposites is, like, he tells Felix, "Oh my God, you're cleaning me to death." It gets to that point where they're planning to go out with these two women, these two sisters, sexy sisters that live in the same building, and Oscar's like, "I'll set it up, okay? You can have whichever one you want." He goes, "Let's just get out of the house. He goes, "I'm tired of being in that apartment. Let's go do something fun." And then while they're going out bowling and having fun, Felix decides, "You know what? We're not going to take them to a restaurant. It's too expensive to take them to a restaurant. We're going to stay home, and I'm going to cook a nice meal." Well, the build up to the date was, a totally another thing, Gar, because Oscar, comes home late. The day they're supposed to have a dinner with these two women that live in the same apartment, and Felix starts in just like, Oscar's wife or something, like, "You said you were going to be home at 7. It's 8 o'clock. Why didn't you call?" And then that's kind of Oscar's attitude, like, "Oh my God, acting like you're my wife or something."
And that's that clash of those
personalities,
two different personalities. Yeah. Again, you know what I mean? The one with these qualities and the other one with just full on testosterone qualities.
Yeah.
And that that's that is the super sauce for the whole movie.
Yeah.
That whole radical difference between the two.
Yeah, and at one point when the girls enter the apartment, you can tell right away that they think Oscar Madison's the fun guy. So much to a point, they're able to remember his name, but a couple times they have to ask Felix, "What was your name again?" But then it gets and Walter Matthau has the two girls like laughing and cracking up, and everybody's just having a good time, and then Oscar has to go to the kitchen for something. And during that time, it starts out with a boring conversation with Felix, but then at some point the girls start to feel something for Felix. Oh, he's not afraid to cry. And so when Oscar Madison returns, what was once a fun party scene, everybody's crying. It's like, what did you say? What happened?
It's just like an explosion just happened or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both of those sisters, I kind of didn't know this, but I kind of wonder if they worked together as a pair.
I wonder.
The reason, because they were in this movie as a pair.
Yeah.
But they also worked together, on the Disney movie Aristocats.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Wow.
Yes. As a couple of geese.
Uh-huh.
And it was the same two women, bantering together.
Oh, interesting.
For those characters. So it really kind of makes me wonder. They did this more than once as a pair in movies, which what really makes me wonder. I think there was a possibility that those two women might have worked a lot together.
We'll have to look into that. And of course, another fun fact, Gar, I came across, it says that the award-winning music was written and composed by composer Neil Heff, if that name means something to you, it's because he also wrote the music for the Batman TV series. The music was also used in the 1970s 2 series. And let's talk a little bit about that theme music, because that is one of those things very much like the Batman TV series, which I'm not surprised the same guy wrote those songs. Both theme songs, there's no mistaking what it is when you hear that music.
Is the second you hear it, you immediately associate it, one with the Batman, and the other you immediately associate it with the Odd Couple, whether it's the TV show or the movie.
Yeah, interesting. They use the same theme. Now, I have to see if I can come across this. I didn't have time to look this up last night, but I was also reading in the music. Apparently, I'm sure we can find it on YouTube. I'm going to see if I can do that later. Apparently, there's a version of the Odd Couple theme song with lyrics. I've never heard it myself before, but apparently it exists out there somewhere.
Well, I just, I wonder if it's any good.
Yeah, who knows?
Or if I heard it, would it ruin it?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's just the question mark that goes through my brain right now.
Oh, sure.
Is because I cannot picture it with lyrics.
Yeah.
But yet, who knows? It could be wonderful, but I just can't picture it.
Yeah, and of course it said the movie was so popular among both moviegoers and critics, Gar, that the film was nominated for a total of 12 different awards that year. But only screenwriter Neil Simon won the Writers Guild of America Award for Best Written American Comedy. And I think that says something. The actors were apparently up for Best Actor, but apparently only the screenplay writer, Neil Simon, won. And I think it just kind of shows that the writing for this was so strong. And this was such a popular movie. The writing was so strong, I think. Often you'll hear people, when you hear people talk about Neil Simon, it's because of The Odd Couple. But anytime his name was in front of anything, that meant something. People would go check it out because it was a Neil Simon play or something like that.
Well, it meant that the writing was going to be exceptional writing.
Yeah.
And that is the reputation that he laid out for himself.
Yeah.
And that's the reason is because we talked about this in many episodes. To me, the true stars of movies and TV shows and all of this stuff are the writers.
Oh, sure.
Because the actors don't make up those words. The actors are just repeating those words and giving those words life.
Yeah.
But the actual person that gave birth to the words that are coming out of that actor's mouth are the writers. Yeah. And that actor is not funny without a good, funny writer. Yeah. That actor is not dramatic without a great dramatic writer.
And I think,
see what I'm saying?
Oh, sure.
These actors are not what they are without these writers providing them with such great,
material
words. Yes.
And I
think, know what I mean?
I think further proof of that, Gar, it explains why by the time Odd Couple 2 movie comes out, I think by that point Neil Simon had passed away, so they have other people writing that material. It's the same characters, but maybe the material's not as up to snuff because it's not the same guy writing it. And not that the other writers can't write anything like a decent movie script, but I think that has something to do with when this was the creator of this was the guy that wrote the original play. He knows a little something more about the characters than somebody else coming in to replace him, maybe.
Well, I guarantee you, when they did the sequel, that the part of the aspect of the movie that was the super sauce, that is what was missing in the part 2. You know what I mean? That shocking difference between the two actors and and all of that stuff. That it just did not have that same chemistry by then.
Yeah, and we should also talk about the fact that Gar, it was Jack Lemmon's portrayal of the fussy, clean, obsessed hypochondriac Felix Unger that became one of his most notable member roles ever. I dare say probably his most notable role. I mean, I think so much to the point, like I said, by the time they did the Grumpy Old Men movies, and there were two of those, they're playing different characters in a different movie, but I dare say that the two characters in the Grumpy Old Men were largely based on this. They're just calling it something else,
Yeah, and you were right. I didn't see it, and I'm not witness to it, but it totally makes sense that if you're going to do a couple of really highly successful, versions of the Odd Couple in Grumpy Old Men, and then you're going to follow it up with the Odd Couple. I think it's just, it just was one of those that didn't resonate well.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, but then again, the strength of such a great script and the strength of the great chemistry between the two actors and everything, you wouldn't have, the birth of the TV show. And also, you wouldn't have these other satellite TV shows that are heavily influenced by the Odd Couple, which I mean 2.5 Men. Because the same exact super sauce, that same chemistry, was the same thing that they were using in 2.5 Men.
Yeah.
And I will even go as far as to say that the Alan Harper character, John Quire's character, was heavily influenced by both Tony Randall and Jack Lemmon.
Oh, interesting.
Because I saw Jack Lemmon do a couple of physical characteristics that he brought to his character that later on that I saw John Quire doing with his character on 2.5 Men.
Oh, interesting.
So I can, I saw how those characters had influenced John Quire in how he was going to play his Alan Harper character.
Yeah, and it's interesting, again, comparing the movie to the TV show, and again, depending on a person's age, I think will depend on when you hear the name Felix Unger, do you think of Jack Lemmon or do you think of Tony Randall? I will say, I do agree, Tony Randall, the TV series, I mean, I think he did a great enough version that of Felix that when people from that generation think of Felix Unger, a lot of people think of Tony Randall because maybe they weren't around in 1968 when the original movie came out. That's just one of those facts. And oddly enough, Jack Klugman, who played the role of Oscar Madison on the TV show, I think had a lot in common with Walter Matthau. I mean, even just physically how he looked and the personality, the way he portrayed that character, that, again, depending on your age, you might think of Jack Klugman as, Oscar Madison, depending on when you came up.
Well, yeah, but, back in those days, there were TV people and there were movie people.
Sure.
And there were, the movie people watched TV, but they didn't, their interest was much more in movies.
Yeah.
And the TV people watched movies, but their interest was much more on TV. And so that dividing line of audiences, would determine how you feel, how you would associate those characters. The TV people would associate Tony Randall, with the Felix, and then the movie people. And another thing about that dividing line that really solidifies what I'm talking about is back in those days, movie actors refused to ever appear in anything on TV, whether it be a TV show or a commercial or anything. The only thing that was acceptable to do on TV was interviews.
Yeah, and so much
they would do interviews, but they would not do any of the other things. They would not appear on TV at all.
Yeah.
And it was considered a kiss of death for a movie actor to appear. But then also, it was extremely frustrating for any actor that was doing TV shows that wanted to break into doing movies. The wall that was in front of them that blocked them from doing that was you could not get past that wall.
Yeah, a great example of that was, of course, Sonny and Cher, who got their start as music pop stars. In the 1970s, they went on to have a successful TV show, and then they made the bold move of, okay, we've made it in music, we've made it with a TV show. Now let's make a movie. And I think their first movie flopped pretty bad, and people's reaction at the time was like, okay, these two pop stars, they think they got what it takes to go Hollywood, or that's what they're attempting to do,
That was a real thing that existed back then.
Yeah.
And it does no longer exist anymore. You have Academy Award actors now doing commercials.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the late 60s and the 70s, and even in the 80s, that was taboo.
Oh yeah, Gar.
I cannot stress how major taboo that was.
So much to the point that Gar, the world has changed a lot since then. So much to the point that I mentioned Sonny and Cher. Well, at that time, Cher was unable to make it in Hollywood, but years later in the 1980s, after she's long divorced Sonny, she eventually went on to become Academy Award winning actress Cher. I think she won for Moonstruck or something like that. But I saw
Moonstruck, and I've only seen it once, and I have to say that I was very impressed with that movie.
Yeah,
I was by the time she reached that point in her career, her acting ability, she had worked really hard on raising the level of her acting abilities, because she didn't win that Oscar. It was not a given. That was not a thing. That was done behind the scenes. That Oscar was earned, because when you earned an Oscar back in the 70s, an Oscar still meant the highest achievement that you could achieve as an actor or as an actress.
Yeah, and not only did she win the...
Nowadays, the Oscar does not represent the same thing. The Oscars now is just a big promotional thing for whatever the studios want to push as something big. It no longer means the highest achievement that an actor or an actress, because I see people winning Academy Awards and I see the performances, and they are not Academy Award level performances. Then I see other actors doing Academy Award level performances, and they're not even nominated.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have anything to do with that anymore. But back in the 70s, it did mean that.
Yeah, and half the time I've never even heard of a movie or of a person being nominated, which is what I really hate about the Academy Awards today. But just kind of put a final cap on what we're talking about here is not only did Cher go on to win the Academy Award, but so much to the point that when people hear the name Cher now, they don't only think of her as a singer, but they think of her as an actress. So, way to go, Cher. Mission accomplished. But just a few more things about The Odd Couple here that I thought we should mention. It says the movie's famous apartment setting is based in New York City, but the exterior shots were a real building located at 1049 Park Avenue in Manhattan. So that's possibly why the it's an 8-bedroom apartment because of where it was located.
Yeah, and that's, it's so trippy because it was a really clear version of the movie that I watched last night. The quality of the filmography was very clear.
Sure.
And what that section of New York looked like back then, it looks nothing like that now.
Yeah.
So that is also a snapshot of what New York used to look like.
Yeah. It really is, and Gar, I urge you also, when you get a chance to have some downtime, I do urge you at least to watch the very first of the Grumpy Old Men movie, because that has become a classic in itself. I mean, I want you to also, first of all, tell me if you get a chance to see it, do you think it's anything like The Odd Couple and those characters? It's funny as hell. It's become like a Christmas classic. I dare say part 2 of the Grumpy Old Men movies is just as good, but if I had to pick a favorite, I'd say, or you're going to just see one, I'd say check out the first one, because I would really love to do a future episode. But also, in reference to the TV show, I think another reason the TV show worked in a large part was because the producer and the writer behind that was, of all people, Gary Marshall, of course, from Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley fame.
Well, and he has a career that speaks for itself.
Yeah, and you were talking about Neil Simon, the writer for the Odd Couple movie, having that special sauce, and there's a reason for that, Gars, because it said, get this, the story of the Odd Couple was inspired actually by Neil Simon's brother Danny, who lived with a friend after his divorce, and the two had trouble adjusting to the roommate situation.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
All fiction mirrors life.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that. People always look at fiction as fiction.
Sure.
But all of the most successful fiction is actually rooted in real things that happened in life. They just changed the names and kind of altered the stories, so it's fiction now. It's not that particular thing. But that is a thing that we never really think of. That fiction is rooted in real life scenarios.
And Gar, talking a little bit about the famous poker playing scene featured throughout the movie, it featured many of the character actors of that time, including one actor named John Fielder, who voiced Piglet in Winnie the Pooh. Now, also, one of the character actors that was featured throughout the different poker scenes, I don't know the guy's name, but I can tell you there's a Three's Company reference, and I've watched Three's Company so many times of it. The little bald guy at the end with the glasses. He was in an episode of Three's Company where, I don't know if you remember, Jack had to sell encyclopedias, and then this bald head guy with the glasses goes around and shows Jack. He's supposed to show him how to sell the encyclopedias, but Jack gets a head start before the guy shows up, and he sells some encyclopedias to Mr. Roper, but he has Mr. Roper signed in the wrong place. So it's funny that a guy years later would appear in an episode of Three's Company that was in this.
Yeah, once an actor, always an actor.
Yeah. And it's okay. And then, like I said, just to kind of wrap things up as we like to do, Gar, other things that were going on in the world in 1968 said other popular movies in 1968 included Yours, Mine, and Ours, of course. The original movie version of that from 1968 featured Lucille Ball, of all people. Did you ever see that movie, Gar?
Yes, I did. I saw that actually in the movie theater, and it was a wonderful movie.
Yeah, and I was thinking we're going to have to do an episode on that.
Very heartwarming.
Yeah. Very
heartwarming. That movie, it's just the whole thing about that movie at that time period, it was a highly successful movie. When that movie came out.
Yeah, and again, Gar, as I was saying, we'll save this for a future episode of that movie because we already did a great episode on Lucille Ball and I Love Lucy. But that's a thing that kind of solidifies what you were saying. Lucille Ball, as we point out in our Lucille Ball episode, she got her start in radio. But when anybody hears Lucille Ball, they immediately go to I Love Lucy. And she did make a few movies even before I Love Lucy, but it's funny all these years later, probably of all the movies she's done, Yours, Mine, and Ours is the one people are most familiar with. But when you hear the name Lucille Ball, a lot of people don't even realize she had a movie career. So I think that's a great reason to do an episode on that. But the other popular movie from 1968 was Planet of the Apes, the original Planet. Were you a fan of those movies, Gar?
Oh, the original Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
If I would absolutely love to do an episode on that.
You've got it, buddy.
They've done the remakes and everything, and they just turned them into action movies, and
it's so loud.
It just doesn't have anything to do with what the original, started. And granted, the special effects, because it's so, that time period, it was so rudimentary and not as advanced as it is nowadays. The makeup that was being done in those Planet of the Apes at that time period was considered state of the art, and they were oohing and awing over how amazing that turning them into apes was, and it was state of the art for the time.
I definitely think that's another great episode down the line, Planet of the Apes. It was so different for a time, and I totally agree, because if you go back and watch those original movies on Planet of the Apes, it was much more like of a science fiction type of thing than what it is now. It's more modern day, which I like them, but I don't like I like the original movies much better. And so that's just one thing I thought people would be interested in. And it said, again, a lot was going on in 1968, Gar. It said March 16th, General Motors rolls out its, get this, 100 millionth automobile, which was the Oldsmobile Tornado. Tornado. Okay.
It was called the Tornado.
Well, you were there, my friend, so I'm going to take your word for it. Did you ever get to ride in one, Gar?
Anybody that listens to this that's from the time period knows that I'm right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you, did you ever get a chance to ride in one?
No, but I had somebody that lived in my neighborhood that had one.
Okay, again, so you're the guy that would know that. Yeah. And here's a very historical thing going on. April 4th, to be exact, Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated by James Earl Ray in Memphis, Tennessee.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
The 1960s was the most volatile decade. So many radical changes happened during that decade.
Yeah.
Social, political, and even pop culture.
Things.
All of those things took radical changes, major pivots during that time period. And, and unfortunately, that also is a decade that is also going to be associated forever with assassinations, because the 1960s had many assassinations during that time period.
It's like you're reading my mind, Gar, because what I was going to say next is on June 5th, 1968, presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy was also assassinated.
Can I say something?
Sure.
I actually watched that happen on TV.
Oh, wow.
When it actually happened.
Okay.
And heard the popping.
Oh,
and
wow.
thought it was balloons.
Oh, wow.
When I watched it on TV. And I watched the entire commotion when it happened.
Oh, wow. Amazing. And, okay, Gar, and it's now, I know we're not taking a test here, but just to see, if you have any idea. September 24th. Do you know what premiered on CBS television?
Okay, ask that again.
Okay, on September 24th, what premiered on CBS television?
You said what year?
1968. So this is, I'll just say, this is a TV show that's still on there today.
I don't know.
Okay, I didn't think you would, but 60 Minutes. And I just say that because...
60 Minutes,
and
yes.
that's a big thing because that was one of the first times they had an actual kind of news-type magazine show like that. And so I just thought that was kind of noteworthy. And then to really wrap it up for today, Gar, I thought this would be fun. Popular songs in 1968 included, get this, I'm sure you're a fan of all this stuff. At number 20, Dance to the Music by Sly and the Family Stone. At number 14, Hello, I Love You by The Doors. At number 6, Sunshine of Your Love, of course, by Cream. And topping the charts, number 1 in 1968 was Hey Jude by the Beatles.
Well, it's hard to imagine that at that time, you just mentioned two bands. One was at the very beginning of his career and just really kind of is starting to gain that worldwide notoriety. Yeah. And the other was on the kind of downward turn. Yeah, yeah. And the one that was on the upward turn was Eric Clapton.
With Cream,
Sunshine of Your Love was the song that captured the world's attention of Eric Clapton and his guitar virtuoso and his talents.
And of course, after
that was the very beginning. He was on the upward turn. But then by the time Hey Jude came out, that was the end of the Beatles.
And Eric Clapton.
And so it really, that year signifies, both of those changes and the trajectories at that time.
Yeah, and then of course, Eric Clapton, once Cream breaks up, goes on to have this huge solo career and has many more hits. But I would kind of say, when you think of Cream, that's probably the song that everybody immediately goes to. But probably his next big hit was, of course, a big solo hit was Layla. But he's had quite.
At the same time, there was another song that was real popular by Queen. It was called White Room.
And, okay.
That is a song that for anyone, revisit it because it's a great song and it's kind of lost in the shuffle. Everybody remembers Sunshine of Your Love, but go back. White Room, really showcases Eric Clapton's talents as a great guitarist. Because his guitar solo in that song is very
it's one of those
forward for the time. Guitarists weren't playing like that at that time. This is a spawning of a new type of guitar playing that was spearheaded by Eric Clapton.
So much to the point, that's one of those songs, by Cream, like you said, all these years later, you'll have these up-and-coming guitar players, that'll be one of their go-to songs that they want to learn how to play.
Well, Eddie Van Halen, freely used to admit that Eric Clapton was a huge influence on him.
Yeah, definitely.
In fact, when he was a kid, he wanted to play. I think he played an ES-335 because of Eric Clapton.
Oh, wow, amazing!
Emulation kind of thing. But that's way before he became what he is today. This is more of his childhood.
His influence is coming out, so to speak. But this was a fun show, as it always is, Gar. I really enjoyed doing this. I urge people, if you haven't had a chance to go see this classic 1968 film, The Odd Couple, do yourself a favor, because you'll laugh all the way through like me and Gar did. Now, Gar, next time when we get together in 2 weeks, we're going to do one you and I have been talking about for a while now. When we did our Ed Sullivan show, one of your top favorite, I think your number one pick actually on your list was Flip Wilson. So we've decided to go in to do a two-part episode on Flip Wilson. Part one's going to be kind of a history of Flip Wilson, and then part two we're going to talk specifically about some of the big guests that Flip Wilson had on his show.
Yeah, because he's so lost and faded out and everything. People don't remember that his show was so popular. It's a literal who's who that wanted to do guest appearances on his show.
Yeah, and I will tell you, Gar, and finally wrapping up today's episode and get you excited about the Flip Wilson episode we're going to be doing in 2 weeks. I learned today, and starting my research already, that after the Flip Wilson show ended, one of the first things he was offered, but he didn't end up taking, was he was offered the part on Sanford and Son as Lamont Sanford before they gave it to Demond Wilson.
I just see Demond.
I
see Demond being played better.
Yeah.
By the guys that they wound up, but not to take anything away from Flip, because man, he was a force of a talent.
And I bring this up in today's episode, Gar, only because I wanted to give you something to think about, because we will definitely talk about this just a little more when we do the Flip Wilson episode.
All good, brother.
Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
Okay.